Welcome to Rewatch-and-Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 6, Into You Like a Train. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what happens within this episode. So the episode picks up directly where the last one left off, with the interns at Joe's bar watching the door for Derek to come in and him not coming in. Then a news broadcast plays on the TV reporting that there was a crash with a train just outside of the city, and the interns' pagers all start going off, so then they hurry away from the bar. Once they've left, Derek then comes into the bar before heading to the hospital himself. Meredith, because they were off and she was anxious about waiting for Derek, is drunk and so at first is not able to assist with any of the patients and ends up shadowing Bailey while everybody else gets their own patients. So the first patient that we have is a pregnant woman who has burns all over her body that Addison takes, and Izzy assists her with her. They start to treat the burns, but as they're treating the burns, she goes into labor. However, due to her condition with the burns and her injuries, she needs to have a C-section, and she asks them to bring in a lawyer because her child was conceived with a sperm donor, and obviously, because there's no father, she wants to make sure that the child will, if something were to happen to her, if she weren't to survive, that the child would be able to, go to who she wants them to go to. We then later in the episode find out that the person that she wants the baby to go to is actually her best friend, who's also pregnant by the same donor. Because they wanted their children to grow up with two parents, they decided to have children by the same donor, making their children siblings, and they decided to raise them together. And basically, a notary comes in, and after that, she goes to have her C-section while her best friend goes into labor and has her baby as well. And so both of them have a baby at the same day that are siblings, which is a very nice story. Then our next set of patients is we have Krev, who has Alex is having some confidence issues because of his previously failed test, and this obviously has impacted his work, not just with the elevator scene from the previous episode and his relationship with Izzy, but also in that now he's kind of lost confidence with some of the doctors. So he's basically just sent to the emergency room to do sutures on the more minorly injured, and he does sutures on one woman whose friend is basically answering a series of phone calls about the accident, saying how they're both fine and everything like that. However, after the one with the sutures, because she had some bruising, they went to give her x-rays. When she comes back, they tell her that she just has a broken bone. However, in the bed next to them, they find Yvonne, the woman that came in with her, has already passed on, and that was because she had a hidden injury that was actually internally bleeding, and that all the time she was talking on the phone, walking around, she was actually bleeding out, and once they left and came back, she had bled out inside and was pronounced already deceased. And then finally, the main patients of this episode are Bonnie and Tom, who basically got skewered together face to face by a pole, and they are taken for x-rays. They're cracking jokes. They're both alive. They're bonding because they're face to face. And then they get the x-rays back and they discover that while they're both currently alive, in order to treat one of them, the other would need to be removed from the pole that's joining them. And additional to that, that Bonnie has the least chance to live because the pole is through her spine, so she's paralyzed from the waist down, And additionally, it has damaged her aorta, which is obviously one of the main arteries of the heart, I believe, coming off the heart or whatever. And so she pretty much, even if they were to remove Tom and try to operate on her, she was very unlikely to survive. Meanwhile, with Tom, it missed most of the vital areas. He's not paralyzed, he's in a better condition. And so they ultimately decide that he is the one that they have the potential to save, and that their strategy will be to slowly remove the pole and operate as they go in order to try to save him, which they do successfully do. However, Bonnie is, they end up having to let them know that this is what they have to do, and they put her to sleep. She is removed from the pole and very quickly passes on once the pole is removed, as it was the pole basically blocking the blood flow from the aorta that was keeping her alive. And then we also, on the more dramatic note, discover that Derek had gone to the bar and just missed Meredith. However, he did not go to the bar to choose her. He instead chose Addison, and we see them leaving the hospital together while we then, after all of the patients have been resolved, see all of the interns exhausted, having not gotten sleep because they were called in an emergency on their time off, and they had been at the bar not sleeping, and they basically now have to start a whole new shift and go for rounds. And that is the contents of this episode. So now we're going to rank this episode on our 2 ranking lists. A reminder, we have our mostly objective ranking list, which is without emotion, and then our personal ranking list, which is based on opinion. So we'll start with our mostly objective rank values, and there were 5 main patients this episode. There was Bonnie, who passed on, Tom, who she was connected to with a pole. We then have Jana and Brooke, who are the 2 friends who decided to become pregnant by the same sperm donor so that their children would be siblings and they'd be able to raise them together, and their children would be able to have 2 parents, and who had been best friends since grade school. And then finally we have Yvonne, who was the patient who deceased due to, well, basically she wasn't even a patient. She was the family member of the patient or friend of the patient who had the hidden injury that ended up dying due to internal bleeding because she was never checked over because she seemed fine and there were far more serious cases. We then next get our supporting relationship development, which is, of course, that Derek chooses Addison, which brings us to our main relationship regression or breakup, which is a negative, which is that Derek chooses Addison. So in this case, because we were in a triangle, it counts for both. So our supporting relationship development was worth 2 points. The main relationship regression or breakup was worth -4 points. We then have the successful emotional impact, which was from Bonnie's death. It was a very emotionally charged situation. Not only did they have to play God and choose who lived and who died, and had to choose the person who had a better chance to live, but they then had to go and inform Bonnie that she was about to die, and then she had to give a message for her fiance who was flying in, but she wouldn't be able to wait for him to arrive because by then it might be too late to save either one of them. And then, of course, there's the whole knowing she's about to die, getting put to sleep, worrying about the afterlife, worrying about whether it will hurt, and then the actual dying part. And then, of course, Meredith in that scene also kind of parallels to herself being abandoned by Derek and has a bit of a breakdown in her still somewhat drunkenness, um, over, how they're abandoning her and letting her die because they stop operating on her and don't even try because, again, they have chosen Tom to be the one that has the greater chance to survive. So all around very emotional scene and also very memorable because of how emotional it was. And then we also get our +4 for just the strong plot concept. I think the plots where all of the patients of the episode are brought in due to the same event, which does happen a few times in the show, tend to be very strong episodes because you get a variety of patients, but the cause of all of their injuries is the same. I also thought that they were very mindful with the stories, like each of the stories and patients that they chose had a bit of an emotional backstory to it. Also highlighted some things that can go wrong. Like, for example, because the emergency room was overrun, a patient or a person who was part of the crash and should have been checked over because they seemed fine was overlooked in favor of all of the greater traumas, which ultimately ended up resulting in their death. Very good plot. The two people together and having to choose who lives, who dies. Very strong plot. And like I said, two best friends. Neither one of them have been able to find a partner. They both want to be moms. They want to raise their children in a two-parent household. Decide that, you know what, since we're best friends and we've been best friends all of our lives, we'll just have the same donor. We'll raise our children together. It'll be great. And I think that is a very sweet story too. So all of the plots surrounding this episode were very strong, and I also really appreciated the cohesion of the fact that all of these patients came from the same event. But with that, we now have a total of 10 points, which makes this episode a 10 out of 10 episode. So far, season 2 ranking so far. On our mostly objective ranking, in first place, we have Make Me Lose Control. 2 is Into You Like a Train, this episode. Then we have Deny, 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 Enough is Enough, Bring the Pain, and in sixth place we have Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. So now we have my personal ranking, and like I mentioned, I really do love and appreciate the episodes where there's the kind of cohesiveness of one specific event bringing in all of the different patients, where they kind of highlight how this one tragedy can impact different people in different ways. Always love that, but I went into it in more detail on the objective ranking, so I'm not going to repeat that. I thought it was pretty amusing when Meredith was drunk and kind of being bluntly honest and talking to patients, like when she's kind of just wandering around because she's not able to help anyone because she's a little bit drunk. She kind of like happens across Bonnie and Tom and is kind of like not able to keep a poker face. And Bonnie asks her, "Is this the craziest thing that you've ever seen?" And she very bluntly says that, yeah, it is. Of course, then we find out from Nurse Tyler, Tr uh, oh, I can't remember his name. It starts with a T. Tyler, I think his name is. Um, that Joe had told him that, well, actually, here's another thing that I really liked. He gets it wrong and calls him McSteamy, and then Meredith tries to clarify that it was McDreamy, but he says that he was pretty sure it was Miss McSteamy, but Joe had told him that he had come to the bar. So throughout most of the episode, Meredith is kind of left in limbo. He went to the bar. She told him to go to the bar if he chose her. So she's trying to wonder, or like she's trying to figure out whether or not he chose her. But of course, we find out at the end that he did not. But her and the other interns throughout the episode are kind of trying to analyze and read him, and they're finding it difficult to read him as to whether or not he chose her before we know at the end of the episode that he didn't. And what I like about that McSteamy comment is because anybody who has watched the show for any length of time knows that there is a character coming in that is going to be called McSteamy, and I like the little bit of foreshadowing by mistaking McDreamy for McSteamy. I thought that was clever, knowing what we do as a rewatcher. And again, there were a few other moments like Meredith having to get IV fluids to hold off any hangovers due to her being drunk. So she's trying to put the IV in, and all you can hear behind a curtain is ow, ow, ow. And then eventually Izzy has to come in and basically do it for her. And then later on, she's thinking she's sober, but basically she needs a blood alcohol test to prove that she's sober enough to be in the operating room with Bonnie and Tom, and George helps her out with that one. We also have Christina running around looking for a severed leg because the one the paramedics brought in ended up being the wrong foot. However, Krev, who kind of gets his confidence back, decides to steal this surgery from her by being the one to basically catch the paramedic who is bringing in the leg and bring it to Richard, who's now been cleared for surgery. Which, now that I think of it, should have been a development on our mostly objective ranking. Other things just kind of overshadowed it. But either way, that would have been a positive, which still a 10 out of 10. So I'm not going to go back and edit that, but should be noted that is the case. And that's kind of him getting his groove back, but not the good groove back. That's kind of him getting back his sleazy groove that we kind of thought he'd lost a bit. Which now that I think of it could have been character regression. I did a really bad job on the mostly objective ranking for this episode. I'm just saying that as I'm going through the things that I liked about the episode. I realized I missed a lot. But it still would have been a 10 out of 10. So really in the grand scheme, doesn't matter. Then we finally, at the last, have Addison offering Izzy the chance to kind of mentor with her under her specialty and tells her to make a decision, but she positions it kind of like just like once you decide whether or not you want to hate me, which is how Izzy finds out that Derek chose Addison because obviously Addison's staying around for a while with Derek and also mentions Izzy hating her and having every reason to hate her. Either way, I felt, like I said, a very strong episode, strong plot concepts, a little bit of humor in there to kind of alleviate the seriousness, successfully emotionally impactful. But obviously, Derek and Meredith endgame, I like their love story. I like it quite a bit, so I'm not really pleased that he chose Addison, especially since I know it's going to end up being Meredith anyways, and wow, would we have missed all of the drama getting to that end point if he had just made the decision now. So I decided to give it a 9 out of 10, which brings our season 2 ranking so far to, in first place, Make Me Lose Control, then Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. This episode came in third, Into You Like a Train. Then in fourth we have Deny, 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 Enough is Enough, and in sixth we have Bring the Pain. Which now brings us to our final segment, which is our series ranking so far. And on the mostly objective ranking, we have season 1 coming in with 77.78%, and season 2 with a current 47 out of 270 points. Then the personal side, we have season 1 ending off with 66.67%, and season 2 with 46 points out of 270. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 6, Into You Like a Train. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.